They thought silence meant defeat, but I learned silence could be sharper than chains, deadlier than the whip. In 1854, when they sold my mother, they believed they owned me too. They didn't know every lash, every crust of bread, every word written in their book was becoming my weapon. This is not their story of power. This is my story of how silence became the secret that destroyed them. The air at Magnolia Grove plantation was a living thing, heavy and humid, tasting of sweet jasmine and the bitter tang of sorrow. In the mornings, mist clung to the ancient oaks like ghosts, weeping silent dew onto the soil where my ancestors had toiled. This grand estate, with its proud white columns and cotton fields that stretched to the horizon like a bleached white sea, was the only world I had ever known. It was a beautiful, sprawling lie, and I, a 10-year-old girl named Elara, was born into its most painful truth. My mother, Lyra, was the heart of that truth. She moved with a quiet dignity that our master, Elias Beaumont, could see but never understand. Her hands were gentle when she tended to the sick in our quarters, yet strong and calloused from a lifetime of labor. Her true power, however, resided in her eyes. They were the color of rich earth, and in their depths she held the stories of our people, the pain of generations and a quiet fire of defiance that no whip could ever extinguish. At night, in the suffocating darkness of our small cabin, she would share these stories with me. She spoke of her own mother, Imani, a woman who carried the memory of a free life in Africa like a hidden ember in her soul. It was from Imani that my mother inherited her most sacred possession, a small, tarnished silver locket on a simple leather cord. It was plain and unadorned, yet it was the anchor of our lineage. "This holds more than just a memory, Elara," she would whisper, pressing the cool metal into my small palm. "This holds our truth. The world they have built here, this grand house and all its wealth, is built on a foundation of lies. This locket contains the one secret that can bring it all crashing down. Promise me, my child, you will always protect it." I didn't fully grasp the weight of her words, but I understood the fierce love and desperation in her eyes. I promised. The master of Magnolia Grove, Elias Beaumont, was a man whose soul was as barren as his over-farmed land. His eyes were a pale, cold blue, and they looked upon us not as human beings, but as entries in a ledger book, assets to be managed, worked, and, if necessary, sold. His wife, Adelaide, was even crueler. Her malice wrapped in silks and lace. She could order a man whipped for a crooked row of cotton with the same casual air she used to order her key. They were the architects of our suffering, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering within their own walls. The day our world shattered began with a deceptive calm. The sunrise painted the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, a beautiful mask for the ugly day that was to follow. But an unnatural stillness hung in the air. Men of trade, faces hard, eyes full of greed, had arrived the night before. We all knew what their presence meant. Master Beaumont's gambling debts and a poor harvest had caught up to him. He needed money, and we were his currency. We were herded into the main yard like cattle, forced to line up under the unforgiving morning sun. Master Beaumont stood on his porch, a glass of liquor in his hand, appraising his stock with the traders. His eyes swept over us, cold and calculating. I clung to my mother's rough-spun dress, my small body trembling. I could feel her trying to stand strong, but a faint tremor ran through her. Then the lead trader, a brute of a man with a scar that split his eyebrow, pointed directly at my mother. He walked over, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel.
He grabbed her jaw, forcing her head up, and pried open her mouth to inspect her teeth as if she were livestock. A hot, blinding rage filled my small chest. My mother stood as still as a statue, her face an emotionless mask, but I saw the fire in her eyes, a fire of pure, undiluted hatred. "She's a strong one," the trader grunted to Beaumont. "Healthy. She'll fetch a fine price in New Orleans." Beaumont didn't even flinch. He simply took a slow sip of his drink and nodded. A simple, lazy nod that sealed my mother's fate and tore my world in two. It was just business. My mother didn't scream or beg. It was not her way. Her strength ran deeper than that. But as the traders moved to seize her, she turned to me, her eyes locked with mine, and in that single, shattering moment, she communicated a lifetime of love, sorrow, and a final desperate command. "Elara," she said, her voice miraculously steady as they began to drag her away. She fought them then, not to escape, but to reach me one last time. With a surge of incredible strength, she wrenched an arm free. Her fingers fumbled at her neck, unfastening the leather cord, and as they pulled her toward the waiting wagon, she lunged, her hand outstretched. "Take it!" she cried, her voice finally breaking with raw agony. "Protect the truth, my child. The root of their tree is poisoned. You must show them." The locket, still warm from her skin, fell from her fingertips into my waiting hand. I clutched it, the metal edges digging into my palm. I watched, helpless, as they threw her into the back of the wagon. The last thing I saw was her face, contorted in anguish, her voice calling my name until it was lost in a cloud of dust and the rattling of chains. I stood frozen in the yard, the sun beating down on me, the sounds of the plantation fading into a dull roar in my ears. They had sold my mother. They had ripped out my heart for a few pieces of silver. But as tears streamed down my face, a new feeling began to sprout in the desolate soil of my grief. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It was purpose. They thought they had broken me, that I was just a helpless child left alone in the dust. They didn't know about the secret I now held in my fist. They didn't know that my mother had not left me orphaned. She had left me armed. And as God was my witness, I would grow strong, I would learn, and one day I would use the secret in this locket to bring the entire rotten Beaumont family and their beautiful lie crashing into the ground.
7 years can turn a sapling into a tree, and it turned my grief into a quiet, unyielding strength. I was 17 now, no longer the weeping child in the dust. I had learned the art of invisibility, a crucial skill for survival within the suffocating walls of the big house. In a cruel twist of fate, Mistress Adelaide had taken me from the fields to be her personal handmaiden. She likely saw it as a mark of her charity, a way to display her supposed benevolence. For me, it was an opportunity. I was now at the heart of the enemy's world, a shadow in their halls, a silent witness to their lives. I learned their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets. I learned that Master Beaumont's booming confidence was fueled by morning brandy and a deep, gnawing fear of financial ruin. I learned that Mistress Adelaide's delicate sensibilities required a steady dose of laudanum. Standing silently in corners while polishing silver, I listened to their hushed, frantic arguments about failing crops and mounting debts. I served them their meals on fine china, all the while burning with a cold, patient fire. Every day, the locket, hidden in a small cloth pouch tied beneath my dress, was a constant, cool reminder of my purpose. It was my secret, my promise, my future weapon. For years, its secrets remained locked away from me.
The inscription inside was a series of elegant, meaningless squiggles. Annalise, 1798. I knew the name and date were the key, but I was bound by the chains of illiteracy, a darkness the masters deliberately enforced to keep us powerless. My light in that darkness was old man Josiah, the plantation's carpenter. He was ancient, his hands as gnarled as the cypress roots he worked with, but his mind was sharp. Decades ago, the previous master's son, a man with a rare conscience, had secretly taught Josiah to read and write. It was a dangerous knowledge that he had guarded his entire life. I began seeking him out in the woodshed, using the excuse of fetching kindling. There, in the dim, flickering light of a hidden candle, he began to teach me. "Words hold power, child," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "They write the laws that bind us, and they can write the truths that set us free. Be careful with this power." I was more than careful. I was consumed. Every stolen moment was devoted to deciphering the alphabet. The first word I learned to write in the dirt was my mother's name, Lyra. Slowly, painstakingly, the world of print began to open up. The labels on medicine bottles, the names on shipping manifests, the headlines on the master's newspapers, they all started to reveal their meanings. One evening, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation, I took out the locket in the privacy of my tiny attic room. Using the skills Josiah had given me, I traced the tiny letters engraved on the inner surface. Annalise, 1798. The name was soft, elegant, not the name of a slave, and I had heard it before. The memory was faint, a whisper from years ago. It was Mistress Adelaide, standing before a small, gloomy portrait in a forgotten upstairs hallway, her fingers tracing the frame as she murmured that very name, Annalise. The portrait became my new obsession. It showed a young woman with fiery red hair and the unmistakable pale blue eyes of the Beaumont family. But there was something else in her features, a hint of familiarity in the curve of her lips that echoed my own reflection. A small brass plaque on the frame read, "Annalise Beaumont, beloved sister, lost too soon." Elias Beaumont had a sister. He never spoke of her. The official Bible in the parlor listed his birth, his parents, but there was no mention of a sister named Annalise. It was as if she had been erased. The pieces of the puzzle were on the table, but I couldn't see the picture. My opportunity to dig deeper arrived with Master Beaumont's desperation. His debts were mounting, and he began spending his nights locked in his study, drinking heavily and poring over his account books. One night, he stumbled out in a drunken haze, forgetting to lock the door behind him. The study was forbidden territory, and the punishment for entering unbidden was the lash. But my mother's final words pushed me forward. "The root of their tree is poisoned. The root of this house was in that study." My heart hammered against my ribs as I slipped inside. The room reeked of stale smoke and whiskey. In the lamplight, I scanned the shelves, my fingers trailing over the leather-bound books. Where would a family bury its darkest secret? In the deepest, oldest part of its history. My eyes landed on the bottom shelf, on a set of dusty, neglected volumes. Behind a row of crumbling legal texts, my fingers found something else. A loose brick in the fireplace hearth. My breath caught. I pried it out. Inside the dark cavity was a small tin box, rusted at the edges. With shaking hands, I lifted the lid. Inside were not jewels, but a bundle of yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon. The top document was a letter, its ink faded but still legible, written in a delicate, looping script. "My dearest father," it began, "I beg you, Do not do this. He is your grandson, your own blood. For the love of God, do not cast us out. My shame is mine alone, but the child is innocent. It was signed, your loving daughter, Annalise. My blood ran cold. I carefully set the letter aside and unrolled the next document. It was a birth registry from a parish in Charleston dated 1799. It recorded the birth of a male child, Thomas. The mother was listed as Annalise Beaumont. The father was listed as unknown. The final document was the poison. It was a bill of sale dated just a few months after the birth of the child. The property being sold was described as a healthy female, approximately 17 years of age, with red hair and defiant eyes. The name of this property was Annalise. The truth struck me with the force of a physical blow. Annalise Beaumont hadn't died. She'd had a child out of wedlock, a stain on the family's precious honor. And her own father, Elias Beaumont's father, had committed the ultimate betrayal to cover the scandal. He had disowned her, stripped her of her name and her freedom, and sold his own daughter south into the brutal anonymity of slavery. The locket in my hand suddenly felt searingly hot. My grandmother, Imani, my mother, Lyra, myself, we were not descended from some nameless African woman. We were descended from Annalise Beaumont. We had their blood. This grand house, this stolen wealth, this entire plantation, it was built on a crime not just against humanity, but against their own family. They hadn't just sold my mother. They were living a monstrous lie, a legacy built on the sale of their own flesh and blood. And I, the invisible slave girl who served their wine and mended their clothes, was now holding the undeniable proof that could burn their world to the ground.
The knowledge I held was a roaring fire in my soul. Every time I said, "Yes, Master Elias," the words tasted like ash in my mouth. I no longer saw a master, but a fraud, the inheritor of a legacy built on a monstrous secret. The time for silent waiting was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. Providence, it seemed, agreed. The Beaumonts, in a desperate attempt to shore up their crumbling finances, planned a grand engagement ball for their son, Julian. He was to be wed to the daughter of a powerful Charleston judge. The event was meant to be a dazzling display of the Beaumonts' enduring prestige and wealth. It was to be the night they saved their family name. I decided it would be the night I destroyed it. In the days leading up to the ball, I moved with a chilling, single-minded purpose. I performed my duties perfectly, a ghost of obedience, while plotting the downfall of the house from within. I met with old man Josiah one last time in the pre-dawn mist, showing him the documents from the tin box. His eyes, old and weary, widened with a righteous fire. "This is a judgment from God himself, child," he whispered, his voice trembling. "God provides the lightning, but sometimes it needs a hand to direct the strike. I will need a way out, north." Josiah nodded grimly. He gave me instructions, a route, a signal, a meeting point by the river. "You go live the freedom we've all prayed for," he said, his hand on my shoulder. "Seeing the look on the master's face will be feast enough for us left behind." The night of the ball was heavy and opulent. The big house blazed with 1,000 candles, and the sound of violins and false laughter spilled out into the humid air. I moved through the glittering crowd, a silent servant pouring wine, my heart a steady, cold drum against my ribs. I watched Elias Beaumont, his chest puffed with pride, as he raised his glass for the engagement toast. He was at the pinnacle of his arrogance, the peak of his great lie.
This was my moment. As a hush fell over the ballroom, I stepped out from the shadows. "Master Beaumont," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Every powdered, self-satisfied face turned toward me. A slave girl, interrupting the master's toast. It was an act of unthinkable rebellion. Elias's face turned crimson with rage. "Elara, back to the kitchens! How dare you?" "I dare," I said, taking another step forward, my eyes locked on his. "Because you speak of an unblemished heritage, and I am here to speak of the rot at its root." A wave of shocked gasps swept the room. I reached into my dress and pulled out the small tin box. "This locket," I declared, holding it high, "belonged to her. It was passed down to her daughter, my grandmother, and to her daughter, my mother, whom you sold from this very spot." I opened the box and held up the papers. "I have here a birth registry for Annalise's son, your cousin, and I have a bill of sale signed by your father. He sold his own daughter into slavery to hide his family's shame." I paused, letting the horror sink in. Then I delivered the final, killing blow, my voice dropping to a resonant whisper that seemed to shake the very chandeliers. Annalise Beaumont was my great-grandmother. Her blood runs in my veins. Your legacy of honor is a lie built on the sale of your own kin. The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos. Adelaide fainted in a heap of silk. The judge, his face a mask of pure disgust, turned his back on Elias and stormed out, his family trailing in his wake. The magnificent party dissolved into a frantic, panicked exodus, leaving Elias Beaumont standing alone in the wreckage of his life, his name, and his pride. I had not whipped him or harmed him, but I had stripped him bare, and it was a wound from which he would never recover. In the confusion, I slipped away, a shadow disappearing into the night. I ran past the woodshed where a single lantern glowed, Josiah's signal, and didn't stop until I reached the river, my lungs burning, my spirit soaring. A boat was waiting for me, ready to carry me toward the North Star, toward a new life. I had started as a girl in chains, an invisible piece of property. But my mother had left me a key, and with it I had unlocked the truth, a truth so powerful that it had shattered a dynasty. They sold my mother, but they never knew she had passed me the secret that would ruin them all. Thank you so much for joining me on Elara's journey. Her story is one of unimaginable pain, but also of incredible strength and resilience. If her fight for truth and freedom moved you, please let me know in the comments below. What part of her story resonated with you the most? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Every like, share, and comment helps us bring more powerful narratives like this to light. Until next time, remember that even in the darkest of times, the truth holds a power all its own.